father looked me dead in the eye and told me my Stanford acceptance letter was garbage. He said my only future, my only purpose, was to spend the rest of my life changing my disabled brother's diapers. So that night, I packed a bag and vanished. 10 years later, they called me, begging me to come back and save them from the hell they had created for themselves. Growing up in our quiet corner of Pennsylvania, our house wasn't a home. It was a sterile, whisper-quiet infirmary. The air smelled not of baking cookies, but of antiseptic wipes. The rhythm of our lives wasn't set by school bells or family dinners, but by the relentless beep of medical monitors and the strict schedule of medications for my younger brother, Daniel. He was born with a cascade of genetic defects that left him nonverbal and with profoundly limited motor control. Daniel was the silent, unmoving center of our universe. My parents, especially my father, orbited him with a grim sense of duty. And I, Eliza, his older sister, was a designated moon, programmed for a fixed, unalterable trajectory of service. My childhood was a series of sacrifices I was never asked to make, only expected to. I was 7, peering out my window at the flicker of lightning bugs in the twilight, listening to the neighborhood girls squealing with delight during a game of flashlight tag. I could almost taste the s'mores they were roasting over a backyard fire pit. But I was inside, meticulously blending a precise mixture of chicken and vegetables into a slurry for Daniel's feeding tube. Because my mother was asleep on her feet, and my father had declared it was my responsibility. I didn't protest. I learned early that my own youth was the currency we used to purchase Daniel's stability. My dreams were inconvenient, my friendships a distraction. The vibrant world of birthday parties, summer camp, and school plays was a country I had a visa for, but was never allowed to visit. As I moved through my teenage years, that quiet acceptance soured into a deep, hidden well of resentment. My father was a man carved from granite, his communication limited to grunts of disapproval and curt orders. He saw my potential not as something to be nurtured, but as a resource to be managed for the family's singular purpose. My mother had long ago faded into a wraith, her personality worn away by the constant friction of exhaustion and despair. She drifted through the house, her face a permanent portrait of weary acceptance. Any time I dared to mention a future that extended beyond our town's borders, I was met with a chilling silence. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Eliza," my father would say, his eyes never leaving the television screen. "We have obligations here. Daniel is for life." But even in the most tightly controlled environments, rebellion finds a way to grow. My rebellion bloomed in the dark. Long after the house was still, I would slide my second-hand laptop out from under my mattress. The blue-white glow of the screen was my portal to another reality. I devoured online lectures on software engineering, worked through advanced coding problems, and taught myself the math I needed from textbooks I hid in my closet. I wasn't just learning, I was forging a key. I was programming my own escape route. The day the thick envelope from Stanford University arrived, it felt less like a piece of mail and more like a divine intervention. For one dizzying moment, holding that cardstock with its embossed seal, the sterile air in our house seemed to fizz with possibility. I had built a bridge to a world a continent away, and all I had to do was walk across it. I waited until dinner, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I laid the acceptance packet on the table next to my father's plate, a silent offering of my life's secret work. He picked it up with an air of profound irritation, as if I had interrupted his meal with a triviality. He read the first sentence, his brow tightening not with pride, but with anger. Then he let it fall. It slapped against the table with a dead, final sound. "Stanford," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Don't be ridiculous, Eliza. Who do you think you are? Your place is here. You're the one who knows Daniel's routines. You're the one who can calm him down. That is your life. End of discussion. The words hit me like a physical blow. A decade of silent effort, of hope painstakingly nurtured in the dark, was dismissed in 10 seconds. I desperately looked to my mother, searching her face for a flicker of defense, a hint of protest. She just continued to push peas around her plate with her fork, her eyes fixed downward, her silence a deeper betrayal than his words. In that moment, the truth was laid bare. I wasn't their daughter. I was a piece of essential equipment, a human resource they could not afford to lose. That night, my bedroom felt like a cage. I stared at the ceiling, my father's words echoing in the darkness. That is your life. I saw the future he had designed for me, a slow, steady chipping away of my soul, a life lived in service of my brother's tragedy until nothing of Eliza was left. My gaze fell on an old duffel bag in the corner of my closet. A cold, terrifying clarity settled over me. They would not be the authors of my story. I moved through the silent house like a ghost. I packed a few clothes, my laptop, the precious Stanford letter, and the $800 I had scraped together from freelance web design for small local businesses. I left a note on the kitchen table. It wasn't an apology, it was a resignation. I need to have my own life. I hope you can someday understand why. By sunrise, I was on a Greyhound bus heading west, watching Pennsylvania disappear behind me. The first year in California was a masterclass in desperation. I was utterly alone in a state that shimmered with promise, but offered me nothing. I crashed on the floor of a near stranger's dorm room, then in the back room of a campus coffee shop where I worked the closing shift. And for 2 wretched weeks, I slept in a 24-hour study lounge at the university, pretending to be a student. My first real job was cleaning labs at night, my hands chapped and raw from industrial chemicals. Every single day was a battle. I stalked the financial aid office, telling my story over and over until they finally helped me file for independent status due to family estrangement. I applied for every scholarship, every grant, every bursary that existed. Slowly, inch by painful inch, I built a foundation. A critical needs scholarship came through, covering my tuition. I impressed a professor and landed a paid research assistant position. I found a tiny room in a shared house I could just barely afford. Each small step forward felt like a monumental victory. For the first time, I was the sole architect of my life, a reality that was equal parts liberating and terrifying. I was free. The next few years passed in a whirlwind of code, caffeine, and collaboration. I graduated from Stanford with high honors. My name was called, and I walked across the stage to the sound of polite applause from strangers. There was an empty seat where my family should have been. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. A small, fiercely competitive startup in Palo Alto hired me before I even had my diploma in hand. My work became my passion. I gravitated towards developing assistive technologies, leading a team that created groundbreaking AI-powered communication systems for nonverbal individuals. I was building the very tools that might have given my brother a voice, the tools my parents never had the imagination to seek out. The irony was a constant, low hum in the background of my life. I maintained a total and complete communications blackout. My only contact in 10 years was a single photo sent after my first major product launch. It was a picture of me on a stage, speaking at a tech conference. On the back, I wrote just 4 words: "This is who I am." I didn't include a return address. Then, 3 months ago, the past I had buried so deeply clawed its way back to the surface. It wasn't an email. It was a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, with a Pennsylvania area code. A social worker from Adult Protective Services was on the line. Her voice was professional but strained. My father had a debilitating stroke 6 months earlier. He was alive, but paralyzed on one side and unable to speak. My mother, left to manage everything, had suffered a complete psychological breakdown and was now mired in a severe, untreated depression, incapable of caring for herself, let alone anyone else. And Daniel, now a 28-year-old man, had been discovered by a neighbor in a state of critical neglect. The family's savings were gone. The house was in foreclosure. The social worker explained that my parents had given the hospital my name. After a decade of silence, I was their only emergency contact. The daughter they had erased was now their designated savior. A cold, white-hot rage burned through me. I hung up the phone. They had made their choices. They had sealed their fate the night they threw my future in the trash. I owed them nothing. It was their disaster, their responsibility. But the image of Daniel, alone in that decaying house, began to haunt me. He was the silent casualty of it all, the epicenter of a tragedy he had no part in creating. My parents had failed me, yes, but their current failure was against him, and it was a failure of a magnitude I couldn't stomach. He was suffering because they had shattered. I told myself it was just for information. I told my boss I needed to take a personal week. I packed a small overnight bag and flew back to the place I had spent a decade escaping. The reality was a nightmare. The moment I pushed open the front door, the smell hit me like a physical force, a foul symphony of sickness, rot, and despair. The house I remembered as sterile was now buried in filth. Trash overflowed from bins, and a sticky grime coated every surface. My father was slumped in a hospital bed set up in the living room, a shrunken, broken man. His eyes, however, still held a glint of his old, bitter resentment. He watched me enter, but didn't speak. My mother was a phantom, shuffling in the hallway, her eyes darting away every time I looked at her. And then I went to Daniel's room. My heart didn't just break, it detonated. He was on a thin, soiled mattress on the floor, rocking violently back and forth. He was skeletal, his skin waxy and pale, his eyes wide with a terror I couldn't comprehend. He was not just neglected, he was lost, a prisoner whose guards had collapsed and left him to starve in his cell. I wanted to scream. I wanted to unleash 10 years of fury and pain on the two broken people in the other room. I wanted to ask them how they could demand my entire life for Daniel, only to let him waste away when things got hard. But the rage was too immense for words. Instead, I walked to my brother, knelt on the filthy floor, and gently laid my hand on his arm. He flinched, but then, slowly, miraculously, his frantic rocking began to subside. His head stilled. His eyes, which had been darting around the room, finally landed on mine. For a single, breathtaking second, I saw a flicker in their depths. It wasn't quite recognition. It was something more fundamental. A connection. A spark of a person still inside. That night, I sat on the edge of my old bed, surrounded by the ghosts of the girl I used to be. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could not walk away again. Not from him. This mission wasn't about them. It was about honoring the brother, whose life had been just as circumscribed as mine, in far more brutal ways. The next morning, I made a call. Not to a lawyer, but to my old mentor from Stanford. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a force of nature who now chaired a major philanthropic foundation dedicated to using technology to revolutionize care for the disabled. I told her everything, the suffocating childhood, the escape, the success, and the horror I had returned to. Dr. Reed listened without judgment. She didn't offer platitudes about forgiveness. Her response was immediate and practical. I'm sending my best clinical team, Eliza. They'll be on a plane this afternoon. We're getting him out of there. For the first time in my life, someone with power saw the entire, messy picture and simply offered a solution. While I waited, I focused on Daniel. I cleaned him, dressed him in fresh clothes I'd bought that morning, and sat with him on the back porch, tilting his face towards the sun. I played him music on my phone, old indie songs from a playlist I hadn't listened to in years. And slowly, he began to respond. He would lean his head toward the sound. He voluntarily reached out and let his hand rest on mine. He was still there. He was listening. My parents were silent spectators to my quiet storm of activity. My mother would sometimes start to weep softly in the kitchen. My father, trapped by his paralysis and his pride, finally broke his silence. So, he rasped, his voice thick with contempt. "You came back to show us all how much better you are, to put your brother away and abandon us for good." I didn't give him an answer. My only plan was Daniel. When Dr. Reed's team arrived, it was like watching a special forces operation. They conducted a thorough assessment, documenting everything with quiet efficiency. Within 2 days, using the Foundation's immense resources, they had secured a place for Daniel at the Meadows, one of the best long-term residential care facilities in the country. His placement would be entirely funded by a new grant Dr. Reed's foundation established, which she named the Daniel Project. Her foundation's lawyers helped me file for and win emergency conservatorship, citing our parents' documented inability to provide care. The day I signed the papers, a burden I didn't even know I was carrying dissolved. I had seized control. I drove Daniel to the Meadows myself. It looked more like a small, beautiful college campus than a medical facility. The rooms were bright and filled with natural light, and the staff treated Daniel with a profound, gentle respect that brought tears to my eyes. They spoke directly to him, explaining everything they were doing. I stayed with him for the first 2 days, sleeping on a couch in his spacious private suite. In that short time, he began to blossom. He made consistent eye contact with his therapists. He used a simple touchpad to answer yes to a question. And he laughed. While watching an animated movie, he let out a real, rumbling laugh. I was 28 years old, and I had never heard my brother laugh. Before I flew back to California, I promised him I would visit every month and that we would video chat every week. I was not leaving him, but I was not sacrificing myself either. I had a life and a purpose waiting for me. With Daniel safe and thriving, I could finally return to it, free from the guilt that had been my shadow. I saw my parents one last time. My mother tried to stammer out a thank you, but the words caught in her throat. My father just stared, his arrogance finally shattered, leaving nothing but an empty shell. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I just looked at him and told him the truth. "This was never about Daniel," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. "I loved him. This was about you. You didn't want a daughter, you wanted a live-in nurse. A tool. And when you both broke, you expected that tool to fix everything for you. I'm not your tool anymore." Then I walked out the door and never looked back. Returning to San Francisco felt different. The city was no longer just a place of refuge. It was unequivocally my home. I dove back into my work with a renewed fire. I pitched and launched a new nonprofit initiative at my company, the Sibling Support Initiative. Its mission is to provide scholarships, mentorship, and mental health resources to young people who are acting as primary caregivers for family members with disabilities. I wanted to give those other kids, the other Elizas out there, the one thing I was never offered: a choice. 6 months have passed. Daniel is flourishing. I get video updates from his therapists weekly. He's learning to use a complex eye-gaze communication device that my team and I custom-built for him. His progress is astounding. Our monthly visits are the highlight of my life. We sit together, we listen to music, and he tells me what he wants for lunch using his device. We have found our own language. My mother sends me short, hesitant emails about the weather, each word dripping with a regret she can't bring herself to type. I have not heard a single word from my father. I don't think I ever will. And I am at peace with that. This journey was never about forgiveness. It was about liberation. I ran from a life sentence they tried to impose on me, but I returned to rescue my brother on my own terms. I didn't fix my broken family. I saved its most vulnerable member. I am no longer defined by the four walls of that house or the future they tried to chain me to. I broke the cycle. I rescued my brother, not out of duty, but out of love. And in doing so, I finally, completely rescued myself.